Sometimes, the smallest act of disrespect is the spark that lights the whole damn sky. What starts as a routine morning at the bus stop turns into something no one on that sidewalk will forget. What will unfold when one man's silence is mistaken for weakness? Stick around to find out, and let us know in the comment section below. Where are you watching from, and what would you have done? Bobby Dillinger never rushed for anything, not for time, not for people, and certainly not for apologies. He stood just a few paces from the yellow line painted across the edge of the bus stop sidewalk, an invisible threshold where the city met the system, where early risers and late stragglers all waited on equal ground. Bobby, on the other hand, wasn't just waiting, he watched. At 79, Bobby's back was straight as a rifle, and his gaze held that worn, unwavering steadiness only found in men who had once led squads into unknown terrain. He didn't need to wear the hat, but he did. Olive drab green with frayed stitching. A patch sewn to the front. U.S. Army retired. Not flashy, not clean, but real. It had been real in Baghdad, in Basra, and in the chill of Kandahar nights. It was real now, even if most of the teenagers he passed didn't know where Kandahar was or why it mattered. Bobby didn't wear the cap to make a statement. He wore it because it was him. The same way the limp in his left leg wasn't for show. A man doesn't need to explain a scar to a country that asked him to get it. He waited in line, third from the front, when the three teenagers rolled in, loud, laughing, energy like bouncing bullets. One of them, tall, thin, restless, shoved his friend hard on the shoulder. The boy's backpack swung, smacking Bobby lightly in the ribs. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a second later, the shove turned dare took root. The tall one turned to his buddies and whispered something. The smallest one, the one with fire in his eyes and absolutely nothing to lose, grinned, looked at Bobby's hat, and in one thoughtless swipe, knocked it clean off. It landed upside down on the concrete. Silence, sharp and surgical, cut through the chatter of the street. The other passengers froze. But Bobby? Bob. He didn't bend, didn't blink, just looked at the boy. That look, that slow, measuring look that made it feel like Bobby was reading more than just their faces, like he saw right through the smart mouths into the hollow chambers where discipline should have lived. "What, you gonna cry, old man?" the small one said, his voice loud enough to invite the others in. The tall one laughed too quickly, a sound without commitment. Bobby didn't answer. He crouched, slow, deliberate, and picked up the hat. Not just a cap, something older than them. Older than any insult they could throw. He brushed the dust from it, smoothing the fold. Behind him, a few people had their phones out. Of course they did. But Bobby was alone. No one stepped forward. Not yet. Then a voice came from the back, soft, urgent. Hey, stop that. You can't just... Claire Whitman had seen it from across the intersection. She was still in her scrubs, badge clipped to her chest, emergency room nurse, shift barely over, and now adrenaline boiling again. But by the time she reached the stop, the boys had already backed away, laughing as they strutted off toward the gas station at the corner like nothing happened. She turned to Bobby, breathless. "Are you okay, sir?" His reply was quiet. "Takes more than that." But Claire's heart was pounding. She'd seen disrespect, seen rage in trauma rooms, blood on boots, tears from veterans who couldn't remember why they screamed at night. But this was different. It wasn't violence. It was erasure, and it infuriated her. She pulled out her phone, not to film, but to message. An app closed to the public. A network. A call for eyes. She tapped a name. Lee as Hiley. Jake Monroe. Texted 3 words. Dillinger disrespect. How? She didn't expect a reply. Didn't need one. 7 minutes. That's how long it took. 7 minutes later, the road filled with dust and sound. 3 Army jeeps pulled straight across the intersection, cutting traffic like a knife. Drivers honked, confused. Passengers at the bus stop turned, stunned. And the teenagers? Still swaggering toward the convenience store, unaware that a very different kind of lesson was rolling their way.
But Bobby hadn't moved an inch, still standing, still silent. The army patch on his cap now seemed to glow against the morning light. And the question hanging in the air, shared between startled bystanders and by Bobby himself, was simple, dangerous, and electric. Now what are they going to do next? Bobby Dillinger didn't flinch when the jeeps pulled up. Others turned, wide-eyed and whispering, their gazes ping-ponging between the approaching military vehicles and the old man standing like a statue in their midst. But Bobby just placed the cap back on his head with a deliberate hand and watched, not like a man surprised, but like one remembering. The first door cracked open with that unmistakable metallic pop, followed by the grinding crunch of boots on pavement. The lead Jeep's driver, a man in crisp fatigues and mirrored sunglasses, stepped out with a confidence that didn't need volume to be felt. Claire looked at Bobby, then the soldier. Lieutenant Jake Monroe didn't rush. He didn't need to. Authority walked ahead of him in every step. Behind him, 5 more soldiers emerged. Not aggressive, not even armed openly, but something in their body language said, "We're not here by accident." "Sergeant First Class Robert Dillinger?" Monroe asked, not as a question, but as an honor.
Bobby raised his chin just slightly. Been a while since I heard that out loud. Monroe removed his glasses. Young, maybe early 30s, but something about his bearing echoed a lifetime of reverence. "Sir, I got your 6. Bobby gave the smallest of nods, and then his gaze shifted slow, sharp to the boys now frozen in place near the gas station entrance. They'd only just noticed the arrival, and confusion twisted on their faces like tangled wires. Fear hadn't set in yet. That would come later. Monroe turned to Claire. "You sent the ping?" "I did. I saw everything. He didn't do anything wrong, they just..." Her voice caught. "They just treated him like he didn't matter." "He does," Monroe said. "He matters to all of us." He motioned toward the jeeps. Another soldier opened the rear hatch and pulled out a folded flag, the kind presented at funerals. Another lifted a case. Inside, a freshly pressed Army combat uniform. But it wasn't for ceremony. It was for presence. Monroe walked up to Bobby and said, "Sir, would you permit us to stand with you?" Bobby studied the young man's face. There was no bravado there, just quiet fire. "You're not here for revenge," Bobby said, not asking. "No, sir, just correction." The old veteran looked past Monroe's shoulder to the boys across the street. They were backing up now, slow, like they thought they could disappear behind a Red Bull ad taped to the store window. "You got names?" Monroe nodded once, already running facial ID from transit cams.
Bobby looked down at the sidewalk. His fingers brushed the edge of his cap again. "You know, back in Najaf, we didn't always know who the enemy was. Not right away. Sometimes it was a boy with a soccer ball who smiled too long. Sometimes it was someone who stared too hard. But you learned to tell. Instinct." He looked up. "These kids? They're not enemies. They're just lost."
"We can find them," Monroe said. "Finding 'em ain't the hard part." Bobby's voice turned gravel soft. "Teaching 'em what they forgot. That's the mission." Without another word, Bobby stepped away from the bus stop and started walking, not fast, not confrontational, toward the gas station. The soldiers followed, silent shadows beside him. Claire stayed back, her phone in hand, but not to record. She wasn't capturing a moment. She was witnessing something heavier. Inside the store, the boys had retreated to the back aisle, pretending to browse gum and protein bars. The cashier, an older Indian man with silver-rimmed glasses, looked up just as the group entered. His eyes widened. "Sir, is something wrong?" "No, Mr. Patel," Bobby said, somehow knowing the man's name. "Everything's finally right." The bell above the door jingled behind him as Monroe and 2 other soldiers stepped in. The rest held their post outside. The boys tried to duck behind the aisle end caps, but Bobby called them out without raising his voice. "Hey." They froze. One of them, the tall one, tensed like a deer about to bolt. But Bobby didn't advance. He simply waited. The weight of silence pressed harder than any threat. You knocked a man's hat off this morning. You laughed at what that hat meant. Maybe you thought you were just being funny. Maybe you didn't think at all. None of them answered. None of them could. "You see these men?" Bobby gestured behind him. "They wear the uniform now. I wore it before. We bled in it, buried friends in it, watched sons and daughters put it on after us." Still silence. "Every thread in this flag, every pin on that hat. It ain't stitched with politics or pride. It's stitched with names. People who wore it until their hearts stopped beating." He stepped forward 1 pace, and the boys didn't move. "I'm not mad," Bobby said. "I'm disappointed that nobody ever taught you. So I'm going to do that now." The bell above the door chimed again. Claire entered, carrying 3 small paper envelopes. She handed one to each soldier, who passed them forward. "Letters," she said, "written by veterans, some of them local, some long gone," Monroe added, "and they all say the same thing. Remember us." Bobby's voice, low and direct. "So, read 'em. Out loud. Right here. Then you shake each of these soldiers' hands. You look 'em in the eye, and then you go home and you sit with what that means." The smallest boy, the one who had knocked the hat, took the envelope like it weighed 100 pounds. And slowly, with a cracked voice, he began to read. His hands shook. His voice caught. But he kept going. Outside, people had gathered. They didn't know exactly what was happening, but they stood still, watching, listening. 7 minutes ago, Bobby had been alone. Now the street was full, and respect had returned. When the boy finished reading the letter, his voice barely more than a whisper by the last line, he folded the page with both hands like it was something sacred. He didn't look up right away. None of them did. The silence in the store was thick, and it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like memory. Bobby stood still, his expression unreadable. His arms hung relaxed at his sides, but every muscle was braced. He'd seen more in this moment than the teenagers could grasp. Layers of recognition, the painful kind, the kind that comes when someone sees the crack in themselves as a reflection in someone younger. The tall boy stepped forward next. His hands were jammed in his hoodie pockets, his face tight with something he didn't want to name. Shame, maybe? Maybe something older than that. His voice was hoarse as he began his reading. The letter was from a staff sergeant named Evelyn Morris. She'd lost both legs in an ambush in Tikrit and still ended the letter with the words, "I would do it again, for you." The boy's eyes shimmered by the time he reached the end. And then it was the last kid's turn, the one who had tried to disappear behind the shelves when the soldiers first walked in. He unfolded his envelope with fingers that twitched. Bobby could see it all in him. The chaos, the broken structure at home, the absence of male voices with weight. The boy looked at the writing, swallowed once, and started. The letter was short, from a corporal who died by suicide just months after coming home. Sometimes the hardest battle is the one you fight in silence. But you don't have to fight alone. The boy choked at the last word, and Bobby felt something clench behind his ribcage. When the final envelope was folded and held respectfully in hand, Monroe stepped forward. Time to shake hands. The soldiers lined up without fanfare. Each teen walked the line, and it was different now. No giggles, no defiance. They stood upright, awkward but sincere, and looked each man in the eye. One even offered a quiet, "Thank you." Bobby watched from behind, his arms crossed now. He didn't need to say more. The lesson had landed where it was supposed to. Mr. Patel, still behind the counter, gave a nod to Bobby. "You should come by more often, sir. This place feels cleaner now." That earned the faintest smirk from Bobby, who tipped the brim of his cap in return. The soldiers exited first, heading back toward the jeeps, but Monroe lingered at the door. He looked at Bobby. "You know what you just did in there?" "I didn't do it," Bobby said. "They did. I just didn't get in the way." "That kind of humility?" Monroe smiled. "That's what makes you dangerous." They shook hands. Monroe's grip was firm and Bobby's was steady, like clasping a foundation stone. The soldiers left without fanfare, just the rumble of engines and the sharp, efficient turn of wheels. Traffic had resumed its crawl along the avenue, but everyone who passed seemed to feel a shift in the air, as if something solemn had moved through and left the street changed. Claire caught up with Bobby as he stepped back onto the sidewalk. "You okay?" she asked. "Been better," Bobby replied, "but also worse. You didn't have to walk in there, you know." "Yes, I did." They stood shoulder to shoulder for a few seconds. Claire looked like she wanted to say more, but Bobby beat her to it. "You remind me of someone," he said. She tilted her head. "Oh, my daughter?" She was a nurse, too, Army Reserve, stationed in Germany for a while. Fierce heart, just like you. Claire smiled, but there was a gentleness in her eyes now. "She live around here?" Bobby shook his head. "She's gone. 10 years this fall. Car accident. I visit her grave every Sunday." Claire's smile faded. "I'm sorry." Bobby nodded once, slowly. "Me too." They fell into silence, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind that wrapped around two people who didn't need to explain the weight they carried. A sound broke the stillness, a pair of approaching footsteps. One of the teams, the smallest one, came jogging back from the gas station. He looked nervous, almost embarrassed to be seen again, but he stopped right in front of Bobby. "Sir." He glanced at Claire, then back. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For real. I didn't know. And now I kinda do." Bobby didn't speak right away. He studied the boy's face. Sincere, raw, scared in the way that mattered. "What's your name, son?" "Tyler." "You play sports?" "Used to. Soccer. Kinda stopped." "You want to start again?" Tyler shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe." Bobby nodded. "Start? You need something to aim at." Tyler looked at him, like he wasn't sure if that was permission or a challenge. Then Bobby added, "And next time you see a man wearing a cap like this, anywhere, anytime, you don't just respect the cap. You respect the walk that came with it, understand?" Tyler nodded fast. "Yes, sir." Bobby held out his hand. Tyler took it, firm this time, no shaking. When the boy walked away, Bobby turned to Claire, exhaled slowly, and glanced down the road where the jeeps had disappeared. "Funny thing about war," he said. "You survive it once, then spend the rest of your life trying to do it again. But sometimes it's just about making sure the next kid never has to." Claire didn't say anything. She just stood beside him, heart thudding, carrying the moment like it was something delicate. The wind picked up slightly, lifting the hem of Bobby's jacket and revealing the edge of a ribboned patch sewn into the inside. Claire glimpsed the words, "For those who stood when it was hardest to." She didn't ask about it. She didn't have to. The next morning, Bobby arrived at the bus stop 5 minutes earlier than usual. Same spot, same stance, cap already on his head, worn and steady like always. But the street was different now, and so was the way people looked at him. The difference was subtle, not loud. Nobody clapped or saluted, but there were nods, real ones. Eye contact held just a little longer than before. The old woman with the grocery cart gave him a smile instead of rushing past. The middle-aged man who never spoke offered a quiet morning, sir. A teenager with earbuds in actually pulled one out and said, "That's a nice hat." None of them knew exactly what had happened the day before. Not all of it, anyway, but news traveled in its own way, faster when it carried weight. Somewhere between the soldiers showing up and the teens being seen reading out loud, the story had leaped out in pieces. Whispers on neighborhood forums, snippets shared over coffee counters, parents nodding with quiet approval. It was one of those stories that started with, "You didn't hear this from me, but..." By the end of the day, the bus stop had become something else. A place marked by memory. Claire arrived not long after Bobby, in clean scrubs and with a paper coffee cup in each hand. She passed one to him without a word. He accepted it with a slight nod. "Bus might be late," she said. Bobby glanced down the road. "Wouldn't be the first time. Want me to drive you today?" "No," Bobby said. "The point is to stand here. Same as always." Claire looked down at the concrete, at the faint scuff mark near where his cap had hit the ground the day before. "They'll come back eventually. Kids like that. They test limits. That he won't come back the same," Bobby replied. "And that makes all the difference." Just then the sound of wheels caught their attention. A rusted sedan rolled into view, slowed, then parked along the curb across the street. Out stepped Tyler, the same boy who had come back to apologize. Only today he wore something new. A JROTC jacket. It didn't fit quite right, like it had been borrowed or handed down, but he wore it anyway. Tyler crossed the street with cautious confidence and stopped in front of Bobby. "Thought I might wait for the bus with you today," he said. Bobby studied him for a beat. "You enrolling?" "Talked to the counselor. My grades aren't great, but he said they've got space." "You know what it means?" "I think I'm starting to." Bobby extended his hand again. This time the shake came with a smile. Claire stood to the side, watching the exchange with quiet pride. It was small, but not nothing. Maybe nothing big ever really started big. As the bus rounded the corner, more changes came into view. There was a new signpost being installed behind the bench. A city worker bolted a green plaque into place, its white letters already drawing the eye. Dillinger Station, in honor of service. It wasn't official yet. Someone on the council had pushed it through late last night, calling it a temporary recognition. But the plaque was real, metal and meaningful. Not a mural, not graffiti, not a hashtag. Tyler saw it and blinked in surprise. "Oh, that's yours?" Bobby didn't answer right away. He just looked at it for a long time, eyes misting just slightly. Then, as the bus door opened and the first passengers began to step off, he said, "No, it's everyone's." The bus driver leaned out. "You getting on today, Mr. Dillinger?" Bobby shook his head. "Not yet. I'll catch the next one." The driver nodded, respectful. He knew. They all did now. The bus pulled away, leaving the three of them there, Bobby, Claire, and Tyler, in the light of a warming morning. The street no longer felt like just asphalt and routine. It felt like a line drawn in a chapter, like something had ended and something else had just begun. A few more people gathered, not because they had to, but because they'd heard. An off-duty police officer, a young woman in ROTC fatigues, standing a bit straighter than usual. Even Mr. Patel from the gas station had come across with a plastic bag and handed Bobby a bottle of water and a banana like it was standard issue for heroes. The sidewalk filled not with noise, but with acknowledgement. No cheers, no flags, but there was reverence. And there was something more. Conversation. Claire shared how her father never talked about Vietnam, but always made her iron his flag every Memorial Day. Tyler asked Bobby how long boot camp lasted, and Bobby told him just enough to make it sound hard but worth it. When the next bus finally came, Bobby waved it off again. He had time. Time to answer questions, time to stand watch, time to be a quiet anchor on a street that now remembered. And as the sun rose higher over the stop, as the plaque gleamed a little brighter, and as Tyler recited the Army values under his breath to make sure he remembered them, Bobby sat down for the first time in years, not because he was tired, but because, finally, he could rest. And the city, the community, his people, they'd keep standing for him now.